Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Radhe Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Radhe Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yamuna Kira Vyatari Yamuna Kira Vyatari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Radhe 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 Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yasodhanandana Brajaranjana Yamuna Kira Vyatari Yamuna Kira Vyatari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pariyajagacharya Astatara Satansi Simai His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaur Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya For several months now, I've been step by step slowly going through Uddhava Gita. Uddhava Gita starts in Canto 11, Chapter 7, and all the way up to Chapter 11. midway through chapter 11. And each time I go to someplace, I end up in different audiences, but kind of giving a background to where Uddhava Gita is in the whole of the Bhagavatam. In chapter 6, which just comes just before Uddhava Gita, there's several parts. The chapters before chapter 6, chapters 4 and 5, finds Narada in Dwarka, because Narada apparently spent a substantial amount of time in Dwarka. Although he was cursed by Daksha, he seemed to, there was an exception because he was the holy Dham. In any case, he was visiting Vasudeva, Krishna's father, and Vasudeva took the opportunity to ask him items of transcendental knowledge. Basically, I was so absorbed in being the father of Krishna, I didn't take the opportunity to inquire from you about transcendental knowledge. So he presents a whole series of questions and 2 chapters worth of answers. But it fits into the theme, partly mentioning this besides context, it fits into the theme of Uddhava Gita, the first 4 chapters of Uddhava Gita, which is knowledge and detachment that lead into bhakti. So at the end of chapter 5, the discussion between the two is concluded, and then Vasudeva decides to hold a yajna. He invites brahmanas from all over. They perform a yajna, and at the end of the yajna, Vasudeva gives in charity to the brahmanas very, enormous amounts of charity, very, very happy function. And the brahmanas retire to a place not in Dwarka, but nearby Dwarka, where they're together doing what brahmanas do together. And in that same chapter, 6, Samba and some of the boys of Dwarka go there, and they offend the brahmanas. They offend the brahmanas by pretending, Samba pretends to be a pregnant woman dressed in a sari, having a big lump in the belly region, and the other boys say, this lady is very shy. She wants to know whether this child that she's carrying will be a boy or a girl. And the brahmanas knew that they were ridiculing them, and so they uttered a curse, which was designed by Krishna that it would happen this way. The curse was this entity under this woman's sari will bring the destruction of the Yadu dynasty. So the curse was uttered. The boys panicked. They went to Ugrasena, told them about the curse. Ugrasena consulted the ministers. The ministers advised, take that lump of iron, grind it into powder, and throw the powder into the sea. And so that's what was done, and everything ground into powder except one lump that wouldn't grind no matter what. So they threw that into the sea. A fish swallowed that lump. A fisherman caught the fish. A hunter purchased the fish, and when he opened the fish, he found the lump of iron, and that lump of iron became the head of an arrow that hit Krishna in the heel. It was to wait for Krishna to disappear. And then, the rest happens later, but Krishna comes to know, because he orchestrated, of the curse of the Brahmanas, the Yadu dynasty will be destroyed. So Krishna is visited by the demigods, and they offer prayers, very beautiful prayers, and then they express their gratitude. You fulfilled our request, and you've performed accordingly. The demoniac population on the planet Earth is now gone. So now if you so desire, you may depart and return to your own abode. And they leave. So Krishna is alone in a secluded place. And Krishna starts to contemplate. The stage is set for the return of the Yadu dynasty back to the spiritual realm. The demigods can go back to their abodes, and my departure is imminent. And before I depart, I simply would like to give instruction to Uddhava. It reminds me of something like Hanuman being left behind after Ram departs. Uddhava can take my message to the sages of Narayana in Badrinath, and then also travel here and there and give my teachings. So sure enough, he just desires, and Uddhava comes. Being very close to Krishna, he knows Krishna's plan. I mean, not the detail, but Krishna is going to depart. So he throws himself at Krishna's feet, pleads with Krishna, take me with you. I can't bear your separation. And the second is, so that I can know you without obstruction, please give me instructions so that I can become free from the undue attachment to the temporary, which is our situation, undue attachment to the temporary, family life, etc., etc. Now, Uddhava's not like that, but he's taking, like Arjuna, he's taking the position like that for our benefit. Krishna is inducing him to do like this. And so chapters 7 begins with Krishna's reply. And Krishna's reply is he gives some basic foundational teachings, which are important. And then Uddhava says, I don't get it. Can you do it again? So Krishna says, I'm going to give you elaborate instruction that was heard by our forefather, King Yadu, when he approached an Avaduta Brahmin to inquire from the Avaduta Brahmin, how was it that he became so detached? And the Avaduta Brahmana speaks what he learned from 24 gurus. The 24 gurus means the wind, the sun, the ocean, the elements, fire, and then creatures, bees, birds, and so forth and so on. It's very interesting, but the focus is when he learned from them knowledge and detachment, knowledge and detachment, because he was an Avaduta. So how did you become so detached like this from gurus, from nature, and from entities in this world? That ends chapter 9. Chapter 10, the one that precedes this one, has several sections. At the end of 10, Uddhava asks an additional question, like that's very elevated, but how can one have that kind of consciousness? So chapter 10 essentially is how to get there, because that's kind of like what his question was. So Krishna answers, and the course of the answering, Krishna negates striving to attain heavenly pleasure, because it's just, it's another model of the same temporary of this world. The whole idea is to become detached from the temporary, and heaven is temporary. And he describes many different things. And at the end of that chapter 10, which sets the stage for chapter 11, Uddhava asked Krishna, how do I understand this apparent contradiction where it says the soul can be nitya siddha, nitya baddha become nitya siddha because nitya is nitya. So how does nitya baddha become nitya siddha? And Krishna says, your question is misleading. Because like me, who am pure, I don't become nitya baddha or nitya siddha. I am the soul. I am transcendental, and the soul is also pure. These terms, baddha, very interesting, very interesting. Baddha and siddha have to do with shaktis of Maya. And they're designations of the soul, which is pure. The soul is neither baddha nor siddha. The soul is pure. Then he goes on to describe these Maya Shakti has two divisions, or subpotencies. Vidya Shakti and Avidya Shakti. Very, very similar to Ishopanishad. Vidyam cha, vidyam chayas, tad vedo bhayam saha, etc. There's the Vidya and Avidya potencies of Maya, and sometimes. Sometimes Maya covers this way, sometimes Maya covers that way, but after all, the soul is pure like I am. Then he goes on to describe the Vidya Shakti of the internal potency, as opposed to Maya Shakti, the Antaranga Shakti, and one who is situated in connection with the internal potency. There's natural knowledge. Thus, a distinction between the Vidya of this world and the Satchit Achit Shakti, or spiritual position of living entity in its purified state. So then he describes one who's in that purified state in connection with the internal potency. They're connected to me, and it's responding to the question, how do you get there? How do you get to be like this Avaduta Brahman? Or how do I, Uddhava, continue my life in your absence? Because I can't see you and understand you properly because of my attachment to the temporary. So Krishna describes the faculties of intelligence and mind of the perfected soul. So it starts a transition from knowledge and detachment into the stage where it's like the Brahmabhuta stage. And such a person, by good fortune, gets the association of my devotee, and by the association of my devotee, that person can become attracted to topics about me. And when one's consciousness becomes absorbed in topics about me, then his state of pure consciousness is there. Then he starts going back. But if the mind is not purified yet, it's important. If mind is not purified yet, then one should take the position of engaging in prescribed duties without attachment to the result. Well, it's like chapter 3 Bhagavad Gita, but it's being explained to Uddhava. That person should, where their mind is still colored with attachments. Attachments arise from passion. Then decrease that influence of that coloring of the mind by offering the fruits of one's work to me and hearing topics about me. And then he goes back and forth a bit, beginning to describe the position of pure devotion. And then Uddhava asks another question: who in that category their mind is not pure yet, what quality must they have in order to make offerings to you that are acceptable to you? So it's now moving from knowledge and detachment from Gyan Yoga to Gyan Mishra Bhakti to Shuddha Bhakti. And the commentators make it clear what's going on, what's Krishna doing. And so the verse that we're reading from, it's 28 through 32, where Krishna gives a list of 30 qualities by which one can know this is a devotee. Characteristics of a devotee, symptoms of a devotee. I'll read the verse, and then we'll go to there's vast commentary about this. It's 29 through 32. The Supreme Personality. O Uddhava, a saintly person is merciful and never injures others. Even if others are aggressive, he is tolerant and forgiving toward all living entities. His strength and meaning of life come from the truth itself. He is free from all envy and jealousy, and his mind is equal in material happiness and distress. Thus, he dedicates his time to work for the welfare of all others. His intelligence is never bewildered by material desires, and he has controlled his senses. His behavior is always pleasing, never harsh, and always exemplary, and he is free from all possessiveness. He never endeavors in ordinary worldly activities, and he strictly controls his eating. He, therefore, always remains peaceful and steady. A saintly person is thoughtful and accepts me as his only shelter. Now, the commentary says, accepts me as his only shelter. That's the Sarva Lakshan, the primary characteristic out of all of them. And the others flow from that one. Same ideas expressed elsewhere. Krishna Eka Sharano, or Krishnaika Sharano. Such a person is very cautious in the execution of his duties and is never subject to superfluous transformations because he is steady and noble, even in a distressing situation. He has conquered over the 6 material qualities, namely hunger, thirst, lamentation, illusion, old age, and death. He is free from all desire for prestige and offers honor to others. Amanina manadena. Similar. We should expect it to be similar. We should not expect it to be different. It doesn't have to be verbatim, but certainly similar. Truth is truth. He is expert in reviving the Krishna consciousness of others and therefore never cheats anyone. Rather, he is a well-wishing friend to all, being most merciful. Such a saintly person must be considered the most learned of men. He perfectly understands that the ordinary religious duties prescribed by me in various Vedic scriptures possess favorable qualities that purify the performer, and he knows that neglect of such duties constitutes a discrepancy in one's life. Having taken complete shelter at my lotus feet, however, a saintly person ultimately renounces such ordinary religious duties and worships me alone. He is thus considered to be the best among all living entities. So this last part, that's text 32, that's the 28 of the qualities have to do with qualities of a devotee, and the last two is a pure devotee. And the BBT purport and Bhaktisiddhanta's purport largely go through the, item by item. Lists them, gives the Sanskrit, explains the meaning, and then the next one and the next one. And then the summaries at the end are particularly nice, but I've already done that. And so now, reference to, it's nice to see, I appreciate seeing how something over here connects with something over there, connects with something over there. And our acharyas have an instant touch with certainly all the Bhagavatam and other portions of the Vedas, and they show the connections. So that's what I'm going to be reading this morning. It's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on 1.2.13 Bhagavatam. 1.2.13. O best of the Brahmanas, the complete perfection of Dharma, according to divisions of varnashram by men, is pleasing to the Lord. Samsidhir Haritoshanam. Commentary. In verse 1 to 8, it has already been stated that varnashram duties, or dharma sunustita, are wasted endeavor. And even Gyan and Yoga, devoid of bhakti, are wasted endeavor. And to support that, there's three references. Brahma's prayers, 10.14.4. My dear Lord, devotional service unto you is the best path for self-realization. If someone gives up that path and engages in the cultivation of speculative knowledge, he will simply undergo the troublesome process and will not achieve desired result. As a person who eats an empty husk of wheat cannot get grain, one who simply speculates cannot achieve self-realization. His only gain is trouble. That's an often quoted verse. It's relegating the Gyan process to useless if it's devoid of bhakti. Now, going back to what Krishna just spoke a whole bunch of Gyan, referring to the Avadhuta Brahmana and just making his own teachings to his devotee. But it's preliminary to Shuddha Bhakti. So it's useful. It has to be useful. It's there in the Bhagavatam. But it's not an end in and of itself. It's something that can assist one to get further along in the path of bhakti if there is some attachment to the temporary. And for the most part, people are attached to the temporary. So it's more than beneficial. Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 12. Knowledge of self-realization, even though free from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a concept of the infallible God. What then is the use of fruitive activities which are naturally painful from the very beginning and transient by nature if they are not utilized for the devotional service of the Lord? So it's emphasis on bhakti and de-emphasis on other processes which may be beneficial but are incomplete or even, distracting. One may become attached to something that's not permanent and think that's it. There's nothing more than this. many people, I would say stronger, most people, Krishna says most people, think that's it. The purpose of the Vedas is that. You do piety so that in this life you can prosper, in the next life you go to heaven, and there's nothing more than that. And it's in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says people think like that. And it's true, people think like that. It's not just people from India. It's people that have an idea of God. That's the purpose. Common. But it's incomplete. So Bhagavatam, speaks strongly about this. Even though free from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a conception of the infallible God. What then is the use of fruitive activities? Fruitive activities, in this case, means prescribed duties done to achieve something, not just whimsical work. And the third reference, going back to chapter 14, Brahma's Prayers. O Almighty Lord, in the past, many yogis in this world achieved the platform of devotional service by offering all their endeavors unto you and faithfully carrying out their prescribed duties. That's the Karma Yoga principle. But through such devotional service, perfected by the process of hearing and chanting about you, that's the key. They came to understand you, O Infallible One, and could easily surrender to you and achieve your supreme abode. So that's what Krishna was prescribing to Uddhava. If one's mind is not pure, and thus in the pure state of mind, to always remember me and remember me as I am, then my prescription is what we just read. Detached work, offering the results to Krishna and hearing about him. And that way the mind becomes cleansed because the color or the contamination of the mind is fruitive. I want to be an enjoyer independent of. That becomes cleansed by literally, offering the results, detached work, Nishkam Karma Yoga, that matures by the process of hearing and association into bhakti, and then it can transition to Shuddha Bhakti. And how long it takes depends on how attentively one applies oneself to the Krishna should be pleased principle. So next, from this chapter, that's Canto 1, Chapter 2, it has already been understood that only by pure bhakti, unmixed with karma, gyan, or yoga, the mind becomes satisfied. A doubt arises. Is there not some worry in giving up gyan and yoga? And in not doing nitya karmas, is there not the calamity of great sin in omission of action and ending up in hell? This verse answers. Though Gyan and Yoga have some attraction, they depend on getting their results by performance of bhakti. But bhakti gives its results without the assistance of Gyan or Yoga at all. Therefore, if one pleases the Lord by bhakti only, that is the perfection of Dharma. The person who does not get, for the most part, perfection, even though performing all the rules and regulations of karma, attains perfection directly through bhakti, even though he does not perform the karmas. This is understood from the Lord's own words. And this is references Uddhava Gita, chapter 20. Everything that can be achieved by fruitive actions, penance, knowledge detachment, mystic yoga, charity, religious duties, and all other means of perfecting life is eagerly achieved by my devotee through loving service unto me. If Somehow or other, my devotee desires promotion to heaven, or liberation, or residence in my abode. He easily achieves such benedictions. Next. Thus, the idea that the devotee incurs sin by not performing karmas is discarded. Question. If dharma is perfected by bhakti, will the performer of dharma still obtain the results of dharma? Answer. Yes. If one performs dharma without material desires, one will attain those desires. But if one performs dharma without material desires, one will not attain material results. Gopal Tapani Shruti says, gives the whole Sanskrit. Bhakti is worship of the Lord, concentrating the mind on Him, renouncing all material desires for enjoyment, upadi, renouncing all material desires for enjoyment or upadis in this world and the next. It destroys all karmas. According to the following verse, since all dharmas are perfected by bhakti, the necessity of the devotees performing dharma is rejected. It's the 4th canto verse, chapter 31. You know, it's favorite verse. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, simply worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods who are parts of the Supreme Personality. So the dharmas, along with proper yagyas, is for satisfying the demigods. It's fulfilled just by worshiping Krishna. So one will not be bereft of the benefits of performance of dharmas. If the dharmas aren't done, this is the graduate study of Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, the situation is different and the dialogue is different, but the principles are the same. In Bhagavad Gita, there's a predisposition of Arjuna, and that's like, I'm out of here. Battlefield, forget it. I'm going to the forest and going to do something else. So it's karma sannyas. And there's different ways of describing Krishna's response, but he says, you don't have the adhikar for karma sannyas. Here's the adhikar for karma sannyas. And it's very clearly detailed in chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, where in the beginning stages of the Ashtanga Yoga system, where one's mind is not purified yet, one does their Ashtanga practices, at least the preliminary ones, the asanas and pranayama, and of course yama niyama, asana pranayama. But they also have their worldly duties. And so in their worldly duties, it's karma sannyas. Karma pala, tyag, or nishkam karma, to purify their mind, so that then they can do karma sannyas. When the mind, so then there's all these nice descriptions of what the mind that's purified, or when one is ready for the stage of karma sannyas. And that's, the Ashtanga process, which, devotees don't concern themselves with. Because we don't do karmas. We do bhakti. And then it's subtle, but it has everything to do with the consciousness behind the work that we do. And that's where we have to pay attention, not just the work that we do. The tendency is to be absorbed in the work that we do. It's really easy to get absorbed in the work that you do. And how do you stay fixed in bhakti while you're doing the work that you do? Because otherwise it's tinged. At least, if not, neglectful. So the bhakti principle is the bhakti principle. It's Krishna is to be pleased by the work that we do, whatever that is, whether you're this or that or the other, students included. No, it's not easy. How am I going to be a student for Krishna? Or etc. Because it's really easy to get absorbed in, like you're a small child. Mothers have to be involved with their small child. And how do you be absorbed in your small child where you're doing it for Krishna? Because you're so much involved with the child or whatever else life is made up of. But when the bhakti principle is active, the activity and the satisfaction in the activity is also there. But it's all minimally, it's offered to Krishna. And then as that matures, then the very act itself is simply a service to Krishna. That's an elevated stage. But that's the bhakti evolution. Okay, so now going back to the Lord says himself, as long as one is not satiated, this is Uddhava Gita chapter 20, as long as one is not satiated by fruitive activity and has not awakened his taste for devotional service by Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, one has to act according to the regular principles of the Vedic injunctions. And then this verse, text 32, having taken complete shelter at my lotus feet, however, a saintly person ultimately renounces all ordinary religious duties and worships me alone. He is thus considered to be the best among the living entities. So that's the pure devotee. In contrast to the preliminary before pure devotion, or the sadhaka. The sadhaka should have all those other good qualities. As stated in the Gita, the Lord says, Sarva dharmam parityaja, mamekam sharanam vraja, give up all dharma and just surrender to me. Based on these verses, this is the summary. The meaning of the verse, yata toror mulam nisheshanena, is as follows. Just as worship of the Lord takes the place of worshiping all devatas, and satisfaction of the Lord is the perfection of performance of our varnashram duties. When the Lord is satisfied with his worship, the goal of performing one's duties, including the worship of devatas, is automatically achieved in the example by watering the root of the tree. The watering of the branches and leaves takes place automatically when a pure devotee of Bengal or other places performs a few karmas out of obligation because of pressure from family traditions. This is actually not performance of karmas and does not give karmic results because they do not have faith in the worship of the devatas. Far out example. No, it doesn't say specifically what their faith is, but their faith isn't. Bhagavad Gita 17:28, O son of Pritha, whatever is offered in the fire, whatever is given in charity, whatever is undertaken as austerity, but which is done without faith, is called asat, since it bears no result, now or in the next life. So the consciousness behind the activity is everything. In the bhakti process and otherwise, not in the bhakti process. What is one's aspiration? Your sankalpa. It's everything. In the bhakti process and outside the bhakti process. Interesting, huh? Vishwanath. Here's another where the verses are being referenced in 1:5:17. I'll just read that and then we'll end. 1:5:17. If a person, having given up his duties in varnashram, begins the worship of the Lord's lotus feet and happens to deviate or not reach perfection, There is no misfortune for him at all in the future. But what does the person who follows all duties of varnashram but does not worship the Lord gain? This is Narada speaking to Vyas in the process of instructing him to compose Srimad Bhagavatam. Here's a doubt. But Bhagavad Gita says, 3:26, Bhagavad Gita 3:26, Nabodhi Bedam Janayat Agyanam Karma Sanginam Yojayat Sarva Karmani Vidvan Yukta Samacharan. The wise should not disturb the intelligence of the ignorant attached to results of work. Engaging in all work himself with detachment, he should engage them in activity. Of course, it's a different translation than Prabhupada's. Thus, it is forbidden to give up karma. That's the doubt. Reply, that's true. This instruction is given to one who is teaching Gyan to another person. Practicing Gyan depends on inner purification, and that purification depends on Nishkam Karma. So say it, Nishkam Karma, Nishkam Karma can go in different directions, and one of them is the purification of attachment to the temporary becomes matured. The door to Gyan now opens. One is less obliged to Nishkam Karma and more obliged to Gyan. It doesn't mean the person who's doing Gyan, it's okay now to be attached to the fruits of your work because that pulls one back down. But the focus shifts to understanding the soul or understanding the permanent instead of being attached to the impermanent. Karma is an exhibition of attachment to the impermanent. And the unregulated do whatever they want, and the regulated remain attached to the temporary through regulations. Nishkam Karma says, become detached from the temporary. Do the temporary, but be detached from the fruits of that kind of activity. And when that matures, then one is ready for Gyan or Bhakti, depending upon the association of that person, or the aspiration of that person has everything to do with their association. That is forbidden to give up karma is true. This instruction is given to one who is teaching Gyan to another person. Practicing Gyan depends on inner purification, and that purification depends on Nishkam Karma. This is not an instruction for one teaching another person about bhakti. For bhakti is independently powerful, not depending on prior inner purification. Lord Ajita says, Svayam nikshayasam vidvan na bhakti agyaya karmahi. Bhagavatam 6:9-50. One who knows the highest good will never instruct a foolish person to engage in material enjoyment, just as an experienced physician gives his patient gives instruction to his patient not to eat food injurious to his health, even if the patient desires it. So if a devotee sees somebody's attached to karma, they're not going to encourage them. They're not but the attachment is there. What are you going to do? So the one who the bhakta will simply add some Krishna connection activity, like Prabhupada did when he began. He didn't give rules, restrictions, and prohibitions. He gave bhakti. And then came the restrictions and prohibitions. Therefore, the Lord says, Sarva Dharmam Parityajamami Kam Sharanam Braja, and as well, Dharmam Sat San Tyaja Ya Sarvan Mam Bhajeta Satu Satama. That's this verse, 11:11:32. Having taken complete shelter at my lotus feet, however, a saintly person ultimately renounces all such ordinary religious duties and worships me alone. He is thus considered to be the best among all living entities. From the strength of all these statements, one should teach only bhakti to the Lord, while giving up attachment to daily and periodic duties in varnashram. With this intention, the verse is spoken. Paragraph. Even in the beginning stage of bhakti, practice of karma is forbidden. Having given up one's dharma, Tyaktva swadharmam. Even in the beginning stage of bhakti, a person who worships the lotus feet of the Lord will incur no sin by giving up that dharma. This is understood also from the following, the Devarshi Bhutapna Rinam Pratinam verse. Anyone who has taken shelter at the lotus feet of Mukunda, the giver of liberation, giving up all kinds of obligations, and has taken to the path of in all seriousness, owes neither duties nor obligations to the demigod stages, great living entities, family members, humankind, or forefathers. And if the person dies without being qualified to attain the Lord, or if alive falls down because of sinful acts, being attached to material pleasures, even then there is no misfortune incurred by having given up karmas, because the impressions created by bhakti are indestructible and remain in subtle form. In such a state, one should not revert to performance of karma. If there's any misfortune somewhere, is there any misfortune somewhere, perhaps in his next life? No, there's no misfortune at all. Va indicates a remote possibility of falling. It is stated as a concession to the opponent. The logic of Tushyatu Durjana, supposing somebody says, so it's a response to that opponent. His falling after leaving the present body is actually not a fall. One does not take a low body because of emitting karmas. This is shown in the following statement of the Lord. Again, Uddhava Gita, chapter 29. We're on chapter 11. It started in chapter 7. It goes all the way through 29. It's like a Bhagavad Gita within the Bhagavatam. O Uddhava, because I personally established that the process of Nishkam Bhakti is beyond the gunas. Even by starting and not completing the process, there's no destruction of results. This is because certainly the sprout of bhakti, being productive, will eventually bear leaves, flowers, and fruits. What is gained from performance of all one's karmas, swadharmataha, by persons who do not worship the Lord? What is gained? There's another reference, but I'll stop there. We're getting a graduate study look by Krishna, and then the big assist from our acharyas. In this case, it's Vishwanath. What does pure bhakti look like? And when there isn't pure bhakti, what does it look like? And there's, of course, there's gradations. There's different ways, just like we did yesterday evening, different ways of looking at stages of evolving of bhakti and the bhakti path. But here it's very specific because it's what's Krishna's topic of attachment to the fruits of work. It's a big stain that doesn't very easily go away. That is to say, we take that stain with us into the practice of devotional service. And, we may expect of others that they don't have that. And when we see it, it's like disappointing. But, better to look inside oneself and see to what degree does that exist inside myself. I do something to get something. That's fruitive work. Or just a dovetail. I do something because I like that something. And by the way, Krishna likes it too. So it's a notional Krishna's in the picture, but really I'm at the center. Fruitive work, where the fruit doesn't go to Krishna, the fruit goes to oneself. I feel good about myself or something. All these modern self-help and self-love and all that stuff. It's just varieties of false ego and Krishna is missing. Take all those things, the things that we like to do. It's not like we don't do them. We do them. But we're joining that with two things. One, consciously offer the results to Krishna. So, that's the beginning stages of the bhakti principle. And engage in hearing topics about Krishna in the association of sadhus. It's repeated and repeated. It's repeated in the second canto, the first 3 chapters, where Shukadeva Goswami is speaking. Here Krishna is saying it again, repeatedly, throughout the whole of Uddhava Gita. It's natural, it's Bhagavad Dharma, it's what the Bhagavatam does. It's what Vyasadeva was told by Narada. You haven't sufficiently glorified the Supreme Lord. So please do that. So it's throughout this hearing and discussing topics of Krishna, his teachings and his pastimes and his qualities and his characteristics and everything. It's meant to not only purify the mind, Chaita Darpana Marjanam and Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, but the rest. The rest is what the soul does in its natural state. Serves Krishna starting with the hearing process. And then the rest of what we do flows, that we do various services gradually, and the consciousness of this is a service to Krishna. Whatever those services are that we like to do, it becomes services that we offer to Krishna. It's the consciousness behind. And faith in the topics of Krishna is the doorway. And keep going through that doorway. Stay on that path that the doorway leads to. And the purification, all necessary requirements come. One more time. In the stage of pure devotion, the necessity of various duties fades. Doesn't mean that one stops doing duties, but the necessity in the duty sense fades. And then one does things because they're to be done. But while in that maturing stage, while doing or not doing, consciousness doesn't waver from the object, Krishna. And that's the result of following the process properly. Detached work. So all that we've been reading in this morning's session is, what about this, the duties thing, the dharma thing, prescribed duties in one's position. We don't neglect them, but it's not everything. And in the maturing stage, one may neglect them. And it's no detriment. That's the stage of pure devotion. Until one's at that stage of pure devotion, we just read, Krishna saying one is obliged. You can't be neglectful. And then comes, okay, now I'm doing them. Now I've got this expectation by doing them, I'm going to get something. The fruit of intention. It's subtle. Purification is subtle. Yeah.
So Krishna talks about Nishkama Bhakti, and Prabhupada said that we should aspire to get out of this material world through the medium of Bhakti and return back home. Is that Bhakti considered as Kama Mishra Bhakti?
My inclination is to say it depends on the rest of the picture. Meaning, is there, side by side with that aspiration to go back home, back to Godhead, is there an affinity for enjoying the temporary? Is it a liberationist idea, or is it to be with Krishna idea? Negation of the unwanted. To what degree is it the negation? I want out of here. This is a nasty place. It is a nasty place. I want out of here. And so is it, to what degree is it negation of the unwanted? And to what degree is it an aspiration, a transcendental aspiration to be connected to Krishna? And it seems like there's a spectrum of what one's position might be. Even if one's position is, it's crazy here, I want out, that's good. Because you got, when the house is on fire, you got to go somewhere. I remember reading it, hearing, and then reading it in a Back to Godhead article where Prabhupada was saying, in the beginning of devotional service, it's good to desire to go back to Godhead. In the mature stage, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you can do with me whatever you like. But when until you're at that stage, to desire, but then that desire can be of different impetuses. Anything else? Yeah.
Krishna Maharaj. So I have just a question for the ancestor, like religiously we just do the ancestor rites and for the bodies who left the planet, right? So for those duties, do we need to follow what's the faith behind it? Like why we should do and how we should do? What the faith should be?
Let me say back your question for my clarification and also for the online people. What I understand that you're asking is the procedures found in the Vedas for worship of ancestors, departed souls. How does it work? And is it something that we're supposed to do? Those are two parts of your question, yeah? An answer from Hari Bhakti Vilas goes like this. a lot depends on one's faith. Whether one does this or does that, or doesn't do this or doesn't do that, a lot depends on faith. One who has full faith, just pour water on the root of the tree. And the benefit will go to the forefathers and everything. And for one who doesn't have that faith, but does have some upbringing or understanding, etc., then one should do those things according to the rituals. And the rituals are not too elaborate, but there's rituals, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did for his father by going to Gaya, etc. So one may do or not do, and depending upon faith. And if one does, so how does it work? There's two. My understanding is limited, but my understanding is there's two possibilities. One is actually very rare that an ancestor goes to Pitriloka. More common is the ancestor goes somewhere else. Their next life is somewhere else. But there is a place, Pitriloka. And if the ancestor has gone to Pitriloka, then the offering of pinda to the ancestor gives them necessities and nourishment, etc. And it's a place of pleasure, Pitriloka. It's in the lower regions of the universe. It's just above the hellish region, but it's a heavenly place. And those who the scriptures describe, if the forefather is the eldest son or the sons of the father, not just anybody, if the sons neglect, then it's enormous suffering for that forefather in Pitriloka. And it's said that sometimes Yamaraj recruits them to become Yamadutas because they want to punish people that are sinful. But if that Pitri in the Pitriloka for generations is satisfied, then they may take birth again in the same dynasty on earth. So it's real, but it's rare, factually. Now, supposing someone hasn't gone to Pitriloka and one does some ritual, then there's spiritual benefit that goes to that soul because it's Vishnu Prasad being offered. Now, exactly how that works, that's not explained. But it's kind of like offering a prayer. How does that work? What's the technology if you offer prayers for a departed soul, and how does the departed soul receive the benefit of the prayer? That's in Krishna's department, how it works. So the answer depends on faith.
So our faith should be always like the soul should be reaching Krishna.
And regardless of one's upbringing, supposing person A in their upbringing, they've learned this procedure. And supposing person B hasn't learned that procedure and they're just introduced to bhakti, like me. There's no worship of ancestors. In Chinese culture, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. They have an annual holiday, Tomb Sweeping Day, they call it. And so it's a big deal, worship of ancestors. So culturally, this or that. So person A can then consider, should I do this or not? Because I have this faith that says if I just worship Krishna, then everything is taken care of. Nisheshamulam, etc. So they have to make a decision based upon their faith. And the person over here, now, they may or may not, but more likely not, because their faith is they've been introduced to bhakti by some bhakta, and that's sufficient. So that's, I'm in that category. I don't. There are forefathers And don't do that ritual. Okay.
In continuation to Mataji's question, what kind of the souls will be?
What kind of support?
What kind of the souls will go to the Pitraloka? Because since you mentioned that is also heavenly planet.
It this heavenly condition. It's a place of prosperity and affluence and so forth. That's what it is. It's described that way. What kind of souls go there? Well, where does any soul go? The soul goes where one is attached. That's where the soul goes. So if there are those attached to ancestors, they may go there. It's a bodily concept. Ancestor means the body. Not that they're not attached to the soul; they're attached to the bodies and the family lineage, etc. There's not abundant information. I've researched and asked scholars, and there's not abundant information about this topic. Like it was a few decades that I was trying to find out where is this Pitraloka, anyways. But as things evolved, it became a little more clear. It's below. There's this 14 planetary systems, and it's below the 14 planetary systems, and it's above hell. But it's of a heavenly nature, opulent, prosperous. But there's someone can reside there that doesn't receive pinda, and then they suffer terribly. Now there's no photographs taken of what that looks like, and or descriptions, and it's just those are some principles that are described.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Maharaj, there's a question online.
You do it online. Go ahead. We'll go back and forth a bit.
By Uttama Bhakta Dasa. Lord Krishna has covered karma, jnana, and bhakti yoga in his conversation. Looks like, at least to me, the jnana yoga hasn't got much attention. Is there any reason for it?
It's just in this location, in this section of the Bhagavatam, emphasis is on attachment to the temporary, and so detachment from the temporary is the emphasis is nishkam karma yoga. Nishkam karma yoga that can lead to meditation, where the mind is purified, etc. Okay. Go ahead.
So Maharaj, I'm again going back to Ratnavali Mataji's question on the Pinda thing.
Yeah.
But it's a different aspect. There is some cultures in India.
There's culture in India.
Some parts of India follow this culture where if someone in the family passes away, then they stop all deity worship, they stop all worship.
Yes.
How do we relate to that?
I asked this question of Gaur Govinda Maharaj many years ago, and he gave the same answer that I gave. I mean, he gave the answer, and therefore I'm giving the answer. He said it very much depends upon faith. So rituals are for those who have attachment, and it's to restrict or regulate that attachment. It gives them some religious procedure to follow that can lift consciousness. And benefit does go to the soul, but it's, the benefit can go to the soul in a more direct means as well. So where is it placed in Vedic cultures? It's, I think, what you're asking. Where does it fit in? It's for those people that have strong attachment in the bodily conception of life.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to relate to, Maharaj, is that aren't we when we give up worship of Krishna just because a family member passed away, aren't we kind of putting some kind of a blame on Krishna for
Some
doing
kind of a
this
what?
a blame on Krishna
Blame on Krishna
for doing this to us?
giving that procedure?
No, for taking away that person in the family.
Well, it's people can blame Krishna for everything because he's the source of everything. He gets the credit and the blame for everything because he's the source of everything. But he's simply reciprocating with desires of living entities. And the living entities are the owner of the credit and the blame. Sadasadyoni Janmasu. We're the architects of our own good fortune, ill fortune. That the root problem was that relative or whoever who has departed took birth in this world because of an attitude toward Krishna. Otherwise, they wouldn't take birth in this world and have to undergo death. Wouldn't have to undergo birth or death. It's it's a fundamental, like the discussion yesterday, the fundamental regard of wanting to be a separate enjoyer. So one has that, okay, here's a separate enjoyment, and it's taken from you because it's temporary. It's not what real enjoyment is. That's the lesson. But instead of seeing the lesson, people will blame Krishna. Oh, you look at what you did. It's the person did, and Krishna was reciprocating. Supposing Krishna didn't reciprocate, then what? Then you're in a straitjacket. You have no free will. But that's not the case. Free will can be misused or properly used. That's our responsibility, not Krishna's. And he's just reciprocating. So, persons want to put a blame on Krishna for something that's a misfortune that comes, or something unpleasant that comes. There's a way to answer that person, but likely they'll stay stuck in blaming Krishna. Different persons have different mentalities. There's something else online?
There's an online. It's from Shirisha Mataji. What is the role of pious karma in progressing bhakti?
What is the role of
pious karma
in
progressing in bhakti?
Well, its role is tangential. It has when we're aspiring bhaktas, and we don't do pious activity. But if someone has that disposition for pious activity and they become a devotee, then it elevates one in the quality of goodness such that at least the potential is there. They can take up bhakti more vigorously than if they're like making wet wood dry first before igniting. That's the effect of pious activity. But for those who are practicing bhakti or cultivating bhakti, we're not encouraged, we're not advised to do pious activity. But supposing somebody is like, I got to do some pious activity. So then they're encouraged to do that in the consciousness that is ultimately beneficial for Krishna.
There's one more question. I'm just reading as it is, Maharaj. So
Slower, speak slower.
Sure. Bhakti is the only cause of seed of bhakti to manifest in a conditioned soul. So how do we know that seed of bhakti has started for a conditional soul?
How do we know what?
How do we know that seed of bhakti started for a conditioned soul?
How do we know that it did, or how do we know when it does? Which is it? I mean, that the seed of bhakti has begun, we can understand from scripture. Like supposing someone takes prasadam, the seed of bhakti has begun. Now, we may not detect something in that person's behavior or consciousness or life that shows bhakti has begun, but we know from scripture bhakti has begun. Or they're passing by Harinam and they hear the holy name, their bhakti has begun. Or even, etc. They laughingly make fun of the Hare Krishna mantra. Their bhakti has begun. Now, their life may not show signs or characteristics that their bhakti life has begun. But we know from scripture the bhakti life has begun. And by accumulating that unknowing devotional service sufficiently, then eventually or gradually, voluntarily or consciously choosing to do some service for Krishna will manifest. Yeah. Okay. Anything? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.